I became interested in Bill Clinton really in the late 1990s. In some respects, I feel that Bill Clinton is my president. So I decided that one of my first large academic projects would be studying the Clinton administration. And what intrigued me most about the Clinton administration was the ability or the attempt of Clinton to navigate a new world order without the luxury of a Soviet enemy. How could the United States create an order, a foreign policy order in which it could continue and advance its interests without this Soviet enemy? How would it advance its interests to the world? And in doing so, I found that really Clinton didn't necessarily invent any new foreign policy discourse. Presidents are not at the vanguard of great social change. Rather, they often react to that change. What's significant for the most part is that not the changes that presidents make, but really the nuances and unique contributions that each president tries to create. And in doing so, they create their own rhetorical signature that really can leave a mark on their presidency and a legacy for future administrations. So what I try to do is try to take a look at those, what were the unique contributions made by Clinton, but at the same time, what were the modifications and nuances that Clinton made to American foreign policy culture. And what I found was that there are three basic categories or subjects that cut across or have animated American foreign policy discourse over the last 200 some odd years. I call this America's foreign policy vocabulary. And that vocabulary consists of America's role in the world, how we go about using military force, and finally, what are the means or the grand strategy that presidents will articulate to advance American interests as well as to provide a vision for the entire world to follow. The book is basically broken up into those subjects. The first chapter deals with outlining in detail America's foreign policy vocabulary. I specifically highlight arguments and conventions that deal with American exceptionalism, look at arguments covering the nature and the use of force, and also specifically what kinds of means or what kinds of policies the government will advance in order to achieve this agenda. And then each subsequent chapter breaks down how Clinton attempted and created and added nuances to each of those subjects. I conclude with going over those arguments again and then talking about how the Bush administration has carried on some of those subjects, how there's continuity between Clinton and Bush, but there's also differences between the two. And for the most part, the two findings that I find to be the most unique with regard to Clinton are, one, how Clinton introduced a new aspect with regard to justifying the use of force. In the post-Cold War world, there's been a movement across the globe, not just within the United States, but to advance a different conception of what it means to use force. In the past, the United States had used force just to get rid of an enemy or to vanquish some kind of agent that was threatening it. But in the post-Cold War world, you have the United States using force on several occasions, particularly in Bosnia and Kosovo, where they are trying to protect the interests of those outside of the United States, the Serbians and Kosovars. And in essence, the United States was engaging in activity that, according to the UN Charter, is technically illegal. But there is a new paradigm that has been introduced, and it's this idea of human security, where putting human beings above the rights of state sovereignty and other subjects. So I found it fascinating that the Clinton administration would engage in activity that would in some respects usurp this authority, but at the same time was advancing a new paradigm that has actually been carried on by the Bush administration, because one of the arguments that the Bush administration made for going into Iraq was because of the torture chambers, the rape rooms, and the other atrocities that Saddam Hussein had committed against his people. The second unique contribution that I believe that Clinton makes to to America's foreign policy culture is that he was the first president to go on to foreign soil, and really the first president on domestic soil as well, to apologize for mistakes the United States had made in America's foreign policy past. On three specific occasions, in Africa, in Guatemala, and in Greece, the president issued or expressed remorse for American foreign policy, for the slave trade, for policies that for in Guatemala for allowing the CIA to be involved with the military junta in 1954 that started one of the deadliest civil wars in Central American history, and in Greece, where the United States supported the military junta in the 1960s and 70s, all of which because they were buffers against the Greek communists and other insidious forces that the United States was trying to fight in the Cold War. And so each time Clinton puts forth this expression of contrition, he helps to realign. He's trying to help realign American foreign policy. And I find that believe it or not, the Bush administration continues this contrition. It did so on two occasions, when it was in Latvia in 2005, and also in Poland. I believe the following year, in 2006, the Bush administration expressed contrition for the United States essentially leaving Eastern Europe to be dominated by the Soviet Union. Bush argued that under the Yalta Agreement, the United States had done enough. Now, whether or not you like Bush's contrition or like Clinton's contrition, the fact is that you have presidents for the first time expressing remorse for American foreign policy in the past, and I think that's a small but major advancement in American foreign policy rhetoric. And overall, the book chronicles really the changes in American foreign policy culture, particularly its rhetorical culture over the last decade or so, without the Soviet enemy, and how that without that monolithic enemy, how the United States attempts to navigate this new era of globalization. One other aspect that I think it's important is that within the context of the post-Cold War world, Clinton was one of the first political leaders to get out in front and talk about globalization. Globalization as being really the defining principle of our times. I believe that Clinton's presidency was about trying to attempt to manage and order this new era of globalization, and that's what his contributions to American foreign policy culture are about, trying to manage and order this new era for American interests, but also to offer a vision for the world to follow. And I think with the upcoming Obama administration, I think that you're going to find that the Obama administration is going to utilize a lot more Clintonian foreign policy discourse, although I don't think it's necessarily Clintonian. It's perhaps more democratic. I think what might be a more significant change that Obama might make, at least early on, is with regards to free trade. Barack Obama has never been one that has been a friend of free trade in general, and I think you're going to find that he's going to come out and talk about free trade, but he's going to talk more and more about fair trade. And one of the things the Clinton administration and Bush both push hard, but more so Clinton, was the advocacy of free trade. I think the Obama administration is going to certainly curtail free trade agreements, at least to some extent. Particularly in a time of economic crisis, when if you open up markets even further, you're going to have some backlash perhaps at home. I do think that the advancement of global free trade is going to be curtailed for at least a little while under the Obama administration.